welcome to the deep dive. You've sent us a really comprehensive set of materials, essentially laying the groundwork for understanding nursing pharmacology. Think of this as your shortcut to grasping the core principles, how medications interact with the body and what that means for you as a nurse.
Exactly. We're taking that textbook knowledge and making it practical. At its heart, pharmacology is the study of how chemicals produce biological effects. Now, when we specifically look at using those chemicals, those drugs, to treat illnesses, prevent diseases, or even help in diagnosis, that's where pharmacotherapeutics or clinical pharmacology comes into play.
Okay.
The two big questions we're always considering are, what does the drug do to the body, and how does the body then respond?
Okay, so why is all this fundamental stuff so crucial for you as a future nurse? It's definitely more involved than just memorizing drug names and dosages.
Absolutely. You're going to be on the front lines of patient care, administering medications that can have profound effects. You'll be the one observing those effects, both the intended therapeutic outcomes and, well, any potential side effects.
And crucially, you'll be educating patients and their families on how to take these medications safely and effectively at home. A strong foundation in pharmacology allows you to anticipate what might happen with a particular drug, understand why a medication is prescribed, and be prepared to intervene appropriately.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's about maximizing the benefits of drug therapy while minimizing risks and preventing medication errors.
That makes perfect sense. Now let's think about where these medications even originate. We often hear about pharmaceutical companies, but where did the initial ideas for these drugs come from?
The sources are surprisingly diverse, ranging from the natural world to sophisticated laboratories. For centuries, we've used natural sources. Think about plants digitalis, still used for certain heart conditions, was originally derived from the foxglove plant.
Oh, interesting. Many pain relievers have their roots in compounds found in poppies. Even something as common as licorice root contains substances that can affect fluid balance, though we don't typically consider it a drug in the traditional sense. It highlights how naturally occurring chemicals can interact with the body.
That's fascinating. What about other natural sources besides plants?
Animals have also played a historical role. Early forms of insulin, for example, were extracted from animal pancreases.
Right.
We also have inorganic compounds that are used therapeutically, like aluminum in antacids to neutralize stomach acid, fluoride to strengthen teeth, and iron to treat anemia.
Simple elements, really.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have the advancements of modern science, like genetic engineering. This allows us to modify organisms, like bacteria, to produce medications like human insulin, which can be more consistent and less likely to cause allergic reactions than older animal-derived versions.
And then there's the whole world of synthetic drugs. How does that development process usually begin?
Often, after a useful compound is identified in nature, scientists can try to create synthetic versions in the lab. This offers several advantages. They can often modify the chemical structure to enhance the drug's effectiveness, improve its stability, or reduce its potential for toxic side effects.
Makes sense.
They can also create entirely new drugs based on our understanding of disease processes and molecular targets in the body. Within a class of drugs that all work in a similar way, there's often an original drug that was discovered first or is considered the most representative. We call this the prototype drug.
Ah, okay. Like a model example.
Exactly. For example, morphine is often considered the prototype opioid analgesic.
Okay, so a promising new drug candidate emerges.
Yeah.
What's the journey it takes before it can actually be prescribed to patients? It's not a quick process, I imagine.
It's a very rigorous and lengthy process in the United States, overseen by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. This multi-stage evaluation is designed to ensure that any medication that reaches the market is both safe and effective for its intended use. It begins with preclinical trials.
Preclinical, so this is all before any human testing.
Exactly. In preclinical trials, the potential drug is tested in non-human systems. This can involve in vitro studies, which means testing in a lab setting, perhaps on cells or tissues in a petri dish to see its effects at a cellular level.
Like in a test tube.
Precisely. For example, researchers might test a new cancer drug on cancer cells grown in the lab. Preclinical testing also includes in vivo studies, which means testing in living organisms, usually animals, to see how the drug behaves in a whole biological system, and to assess potential toxicity and side effects, including whether it might be teratogenic.
Meaning harm to a fetus.
Right, meaning it could cause harm to a developing fetus. If a drug doesn't show sufficient promise or raises significant safety concerns at this stage, its development typically stops.
If it clears those initial hurdles, what happens next in the evaluation process?
If the preclinical data looks promising, the drug moves into phase I studies. This is the first time it's tested in humans. These studies usually involve a small group of healthy volunteers, although sometimes they might include patients who have the condition the drug is intended to treat, especially if the drug has potentially toxic side effects.
Okay.
The primary goals of Phase I are to assess the drug's safety in humans and to determine a safe and tolerable dosage range. Researchers closely monitor how the drug is absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted by the body.
That sounds like a critical step. And if Phase I goes well, what follows?
If the drug demonstrates an acceptable safety profile in Phase I, it proceeds to Phase II studies. In this phase, the drug is administered to a larger group of patients who actually have the disease or medical condition that the drug is designed to treat.
So people with the condition now.
Yes. The main focus here is to evaluate the drug's effectiveness in treating that condition and to further assess its safety in this specific patient population. Researchers are looking for evidence that the drug is working as intended and are continuing to monitor for side effects.
And then comes the final phase before potential FDA approval.
That's Phase III. These are large-scale clinical trials that involve significantly more patients, often across multiple research centers, and sometimes even in different countries.
Big scale.
Huge scale. The purpose of Phase III trials is to confirm the drug's effectiveness in a broader patient population and to continue to monitor for any less common or longer-term side effects that might not have been apparent in the smaller earlier studies. These trials often compare the new drug to a placebo or to an existing standard treatment.
So after all that data is collected, the FDA reviews it, and if they're satisfied, the drug is approved for use.
Precisely. The FDA meticulously reviews all the data from the preclinical studies and the 3 phases of clinical trials. They have expert advisory committees that weigh the potential benefits of the drug against its potential risks. If the FDA determines that the benefits outweigh the risks for the intended use, they grant approval, and the drug can then be legally marketed and sold to the public.
This whole process can take many years, can't it? I've heard about situations where a drug might be available in other countries before it's approved in the U.S.
That's true. The drug development and approval process in the U.S. is quite comprehensive and can indeed take several years. This can sometimes lead to what's referred to as a drug lag. The FDA's priority is ensuring patient safety and drug efficacy, which necessitates this thorough evaluation. However, the FDA does have mechanisms to expedite the review of drugs that show significant promise for treating serious conditions where there are limited or no other effective therapies available.
Like fast tracking.
Exactly. Designations like fast track or breakthrough therapy. We even saw accelerated emergency use authorizations during public health crises like the COVID-19 pandemic for certain vaccines and treatments while ongoing studies continued.
Right, that makes sense. Once a drug receives FDA approval, it gets a name, or actually several names, which can be a bit confusing.
It can definitely be a source of confusion. When a drug is initially developed and approved, it's given a generic name, which is also known as the non-proprietary name. This is the official scientific name of the drug.
Okay.
The company that developed the drug will then usually give it a brand name, also called a trade name or proprietary name, which is what's often used in marketing.
Like Tylenol.
Exactly. And finally, the drug also has a chemical name, which describes its precise chemical structure. To help keep things clear, when we're discussing drug names, we'll use regular font for generic and chemical names in italics with a capital letter for brand names.
Got it.
And yes, because once the original patent on a drug expires, other companies can manufacture and sell generic versions. A single generic drug might be sold under several different brand names.
We've talked about approved uses for medications, but I've also come across the term off-label use. What exactly does that signify?
Off-label use refers to the practice of prescribing and using a medication for a condition or in a way that has not been specifically approved by the FDA.
So using it for something different.
Essentially, yes. This can happen after a drug is already on the market if healthcare providers observe that it's effective for a different condition or in a different patient population than its original approval. Sometimes these off-label uses are later supported by clinical research and can eventually lead to the FDA granting a new approval for that specific use.
Oh, okay.
It's quite common in certain areas of medicine, such as pediatrics and oncology, where research in specific populations might be limited. As nurses, it's important for you to be aware of off-label uses and to understand the rationale behind them, as well as the potential risks and benefits.
It sounds like the FDA's role in regulating medications has expanded significantly over time. Were there specific events that led to these increased powers?
Absolutely. Key pieces of legislation have shaped the FDA's authority, often in response to public health tragedies. For example, in the 1930s, there was a case where an elixir of sulfanilamide was formulated with a toxic solvent, leading to numerous deaths.
Wow.
This public health crisis directly led to the passage of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, which significantly expanded the FDA's powers to require safety testing of drugs before they could be marketed and to regulate drug labeling.
A huge step.
Definitely. Later, in the 1960s, the thalidomide tragedy, where a drug given to pregnant women for morning sickness caused severe birth defects, further highlighted the need for stricter regulations. This led to the Kefauver-Harris Amendments of 1962, which mandated that drug manufacturers had to provide proof of both safety and efficacy before a drug could be approved.
Safety and effectiveness.
Got it. Right. Over the years, additional laws have given the FDA authority over areas like controlled substances, dietary supplements, and over-the-counter medications.
Speaking of specific populations, I recall learning about pregnancy risk categories for medications, like A, B, C, D, X. Is that still how drugs are classified in terms of their safety during pregnancy?
That system is actually undergoing a significant change. For many years, the FDA used those letter categories A, B, C, D, and X to indicate the potential risk of a drug to a developing fetus. However, it was recognized that these categories could be overly simplistic and often didn't provide enough detailed information to guide prescribing decisions.
Yeah, I can see that.
So in 2015, the FDA implemented a new labeling rule that moves away from these letter categories and instead requires more comprehensive information about the risks and benefits of using a drug during pregnancy, lactation, and individuals of reproductive potential.
More detailed info then.
Much more. This new labeling provides a narrative summary of available data, including human and animal studies, and offers more specific guidance for healthcare providers to have informed discussions with their patients.
That sounds much more useful. We also need to be particularly cautious about certain medications that have a high potential for misuse or addiction. That's where the concept of controlled substances comes in, correct?
Exactly. The Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970 established 5 schedules, categorized from CI to CV, for drugs based on their potential for abuse and their likelihood to cause physical or psychological dependence, as well as their accepted medical use.
Okay, the schedules.
Right. Schedule ICI drugs, like heroin, have a high abuse potential and no currently accepted medical use in the United States. As you move down the schedules to CV, the abuse potential generally decreases. Examples of CI drugs include certain opioid pain relievers, while CV drugs might include cough preparations containing small amounts of codeine.
And who regulates these?
The Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, strictly regulates the prescribing, dispensing, storage, and use of these controlled substances. Healthcare providers who prescribe controlled substances are required to have a DEA registration number, and there are stringent requirements for record keeping and inventory.
Right.
It's also important to remember that state and local regulations regarding controlled substances can be even more restrictive than federal laws.
Now let's shift gears to the topic of cost. Generic medications are typically much less expensive than their brand name counterparts. But are they truly the same in terms of how they work in the body?
That's a very important question. Generic drugs contain the exact same active ingredient, dosage form, route of administration, and strength as the original brand name drug. They are also required to meet the same strict standards for quality, purity, and stability.
So chemically the same active part.
Exactly. The FDA ensures that generic drugs are bioequivalent to their brand name counterparts. This means that they work in the body in the same way and deliver the same amount of the active ingredient to the bloodstream over the same period of time.
Okay.
Because generic drug manufacturers don't have to repeat the extensive and expensive clinical trials and initial marketing campaigns, they can offer the medication at a significantly lower cost.
Makes sense why they're cheaper.
Right. While the inactive ingredients, such as fillers and binders, may differ between a generic and a brand name drug, the active ingredient is the same, and most people find generic medications to be equally safe and effective.
But not always.
Well, in some cases, particularly for drugs with a very narrow therapeutic index, meaning there's a small difference between the effective dose and a toxic dose, a prescriber might specifically indicate dispense as written on a prescription to ensure the patient receives the brand name product.
Okay, for those tricky drugs.
Yeah, just to be extra cautious sometimes.
What about medications that are developed for very rare diseases, where the potential patient population is so small that it might not be profitable for a drug company to invest in their development?
That's where the concept of orphan drugs comes in. These are medications intended to treat rare diseases or conditions that affect a very small number of people.
Orphan drugs.
Yes. Without some form of encouragement, pharmaceutical companies might not find it economically worthwhile to invest the significant resources required to research, develop, and bring these drugs to market. The Orphan Drug Act of 1983 was enacted to address this issue by providing various incentives to companies that develop orphan drugs, such as tax credits, market exclusivity for a period of time, and assistance with the regulatory process.
So it encourages development for rare conditions.
Exactly. This has led to the development of many important treatments for conditions that previously had no available therapies.
And then we have over-the-counter, or OTC, medications that we can purchase without a prescription.
Yeah.
The general perception is that these are inherently safe. Is that always the case?
While OTC drugs are considered safe and effective when used according to the instructions on the product label, it's important to understand that they are not without potential risks.
Like what kind of risks?
Well, for example, OTC medications can sometimes mask the symptoms of a more serious underlying medical condition, delaying proper diagnosis and treatment. They can also interact with prescription medications or other OTC drugs a person might be taking.
Oh, interactions are key.
Definitely. Additionally, individuals can experience adverse reactions to the inactive ingredients in OTC products, and there's always the potential for incorrect dosing if the instructions are not followed carefully.
Right.
This is why it's a crucial part of your role as a nurse to ask patients about any OTC medications they're using and to educate them about potential interactions and risks.
Good point. And what about behind the counter?
Yes. We also have what are sometimes called behind-the-counter BTC drugs.
Yeah.
These don't require a full prescription, but are kept behind the pharmacy counter and may have restrictions on their purchase, such as pseudoephedrine.
Stuff in some cold meds.
Exactly, which is used in some cold and allergy medications, but is also regulated due to its potential for misuse in the production of illicit substances.
Okay. This has been an incredibly helpful overview of the foundational principles of pharmacology. Now, as future nurses, you won't be expected to memorize every single detail we've discussed. So where can you turn to find reliable and up-to-date drug information in your practice?
You're absolutely right. Pharmacology is a constantly evolving field, with new drugs being developed and new information emerging regularly. Relying solely on your memory or even your textbooks won't be sufficient. You need to know where to find accurate and current information when you need it.
So what are some of the key resources that nurses should be familiar with? Let's start basic.
Okay, one of the most fundamental sources is the drug label itself. Every medication comes with a label that contains essential information, including the brand and generic names, the dosage strength, the expiration date, any important warnings or precautions, and the proper route of administration.
The basics right on the bottle or box.
Exactly. Understanding how to accurately read and interpret a drug label is a basic but critical skill for safe medication administration.
And what about those detailed leaflets that come packaged with prescription medications, the package inserts?
Yes, the package insert, also known as the full prescribing information, is a comprehensive document prepared by the drug manufacturer and approved by the FDA. It contains detailed information about the drug's chemical properties, how it works in the body, the results of clinical studies, indications for use, contraindications, potential adverse effects, and much more.
They can be pretty dense, though, can't they?
They can be quite lengthy and technical, absolutely, but they are an incredibly accurate and up-to-date source of information. The FDA has actually revised the format of package inserts in recent years to include a highlights of prescribing information section at the beginning.
Oh, that's helpful. A summary up front.
Exactly, making the most crucial information easier to locate quickly. You can also often find the full prescribing information online through the FDA's website, www.fda.gov.
Good resource. Beyond labels and package inserts, are there specific reference books that are particularly valuable for nurses?
Absolutely. There are several types of drug reference books available. The Physician's Desk Reference, or PDR, is a well-known compilation of package inserts. However, it's important to remember that the information in the PDR is provided by the drug manufacturers themselves.
So maybe a slight bias.
Potentially, yes. Resources like Drug Facts and Comparisons offer a broader range of information organized by drug class and often include comparative information such as cost and patient education materials. The AMA Drug Evaluations provides detailed, unbiased drug monographs, including information on new and investigational drugs.
Okay.
And for nursing students and practicing nurses, there are also numerous nursing drug handbooks available. These resources typically provide alphabetically organized monographs for individual drugs with a strong emphasis on nursing considerations.
Like what specifically?
Things like how to safely administer the medication, potential nursing diagnoses, important assessments to make, and crucial patient teaching points. You'll likely become familiar with several of these types of references during your nursing program.
How can nurses stay up to date on the latest developments in research in pharmacology? Things change fast.
They really do. Professional journals are an excellent way to stay current. Publications like the Medical Letter offer concise, critical reviews of new drugs and treatment guidelines. Nursing journals, such as the American Journal of Nursing, often feature articles on new medications, medication safety, potential drug errors, and specific nursing implications for drug therapy.
And of course, the internet is a ubiquitous source of information these days. But how can nurses and patients determine which online resources are reliable when it comes to medications? There's so much out there.
That's a very important consideration. While the internet can be a convenient source of information, it's crucial to evaluate the credibility of websites offering health and drug information. Reputable sources often include government websites, such as those of the FDA and the National Institutes of Health, NIH.
Okay, .gov sites.
Right, as well as websites of professional nursing and medical organizations like the American Nurses Association, ANA, the Mayo Clinic, and Medscape. When evaluating an online source, look for clear information about the website's authors, their credentials, the purpose of the site, and whether the information is based on scientific evidence.
Check the source.
Exactly. Be wary of sites that make unsubstantiated claims or have a clear bias. As a nurse, you'll play a vital role in guiding patients towards reliable online resources and helping them navigate the sometimes overwhelming amount of information available. So, to summarize our deep dive into the fundamentals of nursing pharmacology, we've covered the basic definitions of pharmacology and pharmacotherapeutics, the rigorous process of drug development and FDA approval, the importance of understanding different drug names, the regulatory roles of the FDA and DEA, the evolution of pregnancy risk labeling, the complexities of controlled substances, the distinctions between generic and brand name drugs, the purpose of orphan and OTC drugs, and finally, the essential resources for obtaining reliable drug information.
Absolutely. This foundational knowledge is so critical for ensuring medication safety and providing high-quality patient care. So as you continue your journey in nursing, I want you to really think about how you will integrate these principles into your practice. How will you actively seek out and utilize reliable drug information to make informed decisions and provide the best possible care for your patients in this constantly evolving field of pharmacology?